Great. Thank you, Siddharth. Before we start, I'll just introduce myself quickly. I'm Malavika Chauhan, and I initially did my PhD on river ecology. Currently, I work with the Tata Trusts. Before we go on, I'll just like to start with an introduction to the forum, which actually I think is quite redundant to this group over here. It's an active network of individuals, organizations who've dedicated themselves to the revival of rivers. And the working of the organization, as you already know, is currently managed by 6 core organizations: Stand Up, PSI, WWF India, INTAC, Toxic Links, and the Peace Institute. And there are the organizing committee members along with them. You also probably know that the India River Weeks is something which was started in 2014 to celebrate the existence and the survival of rivers in this country, and to bring increased focus to river conservation efforts. The India River Week and India Rivers Day has been organized in alternate years by the committee. Themes have included issues regarding rivers in crisis, specific rivers including Yamuna and Ganga, urban rivers, health, and the institutional framework for river governance till date. The current week this year is focused on sand mining. Is sand mining killing our rivers? And for this is the 4th dialogue which is going on. And just quickly taking you through some of the key learnings from the first 3 dialogues. We've had the North, South, and West zones till date. Today, we'll be taking forward the East zone. In the North, largely, it was looking at the fact that urban areas and the government being the largest consumers of sand, the fact that civil society and local communities should have a key role in monitoring, feedback, and governance. And there was a discussion of the orders of 2012 of the Supreme Court on this, district mining reports and replenishment reports, discussion on funds, and all this happened during the North Zone discussion. In the South Zone discussion, largely what was looked at was, there was a discussion on the different sand mining rates of the Himalayan versus the South rivers, and the fact that, over a large percentage of the sand has been trapped in reservoirs, you have a decline in rainfall, and largely, which basically makes the southern rivers much more susceptible to sand mining on the whole, as compared to Himalayan rivers, which have a constant inflow. And the other, there was some discussion on knowledge gaps, particularly regarding the amount of sand which is being released from dams. There was an issue on the importance of biodiversity, the fact that sand mining is creating a conflict between local fisher communities and biodiversity on the ground itself. The issue also, one of the important issues which was also mentioned and discussed was the fact that externalities regarding mining are not reflected in the current price of sand. And this is something which of course is being studied considerably, but needs continuous discussion to be able to be built into policy going forward. The West Zone discussion initiated and centered to a great extent around an alternative approach to construction, the issue of alternatives in general for sand. And this is something which I think it was decided that should be followed up again going forward in some kind of discussion. Another issue that came up in a big way, and which is something which all of us already know, is that local people have always been a part of the sand mining practices which are happening on the ground. Many of them are part of what we call the sand mafia, or the overall illegal sand mining activities which are happening. A lot of discussion is required. It's much needed to go deeper into this issue. We need to talk about much more about politically strengthening community institutions, the Gram Sabhas, the Panchayats, maybe local urban bodies, to play a regulatory role, because if that doesn't happen, then pretty much nothing we talk about is actually going to fructify on the ground. And of course, there was discussion on the ecological dimensions of sand mining, and especially some of the dramatic impacts on certain species and their habitats. There was a presentation on the short and long-term suggestions for legal reforms and their enforcements. So that was just a quick and short backdrop of what happened till date. And now going forward on today. Before I introduce Dr. Ravi Chopra to give the overall presentation for this zone, I'd like to request everybody that please question and answers, any questions that you have, please put them on the chat, on the question answer box and not on the chat box. Only comments in the chat box, please, because we'll be looking at the questions for the question answer session. During your session, each of your session, until the question answer session starts, your video and audio will stay on. I will turn off. I will turn on my video. Each of you gets 10 minutes. So you're going to have 8 minutes for the presentation. And you have 10 minutes for the presentation. I'll turn on my video after 8 minutes. That should be that you'll have another 2 minutes remaining after that. So I'd like to now move on to introducing Dr. Ravi Chopra, who actually doesn't need much introduction, I would think, amongst this group over here. He's been a recipient of IIT Bombay's 2012 Distinguished Alumni Award. We all know he is a former director of the People Science Institute, that Dehradun-based non-profit research and development organization, which has done enormous work in water resources management, disaster mitigation, on environmental quality. He's currently the chairman of a high-powered committee appointed by the Supreme Court of India to review the Char Dham Pariyojana in Uttarakhand. He's also involved in a great many other things. I'm not going to go into it's a very long bio, and I'm just going to cut it here, Ravi, and hand it over to you. Dr. Ravi Chopra. Ravi,
thank you for cutting me short. How many minutes do you give me? 10 or 15?
Well, from my listing, I think you have 10 minutes, unless
10 minutes.
Siddharth is willing to give you another 5 minutes. Over to you.
Okay.
You putting up your PPT?
Okay, yeah, I'll just put on the screen. Just takes, my computer is very slow. Okay?
No problem, take your time.
All right. Can you see it now?
Not yet. We're waiting, no issue.
I have a technical expert to help me out. Okay.
Yes, it seems you do have 15 minutes.
Yes. And this should go to...
Yeah, we can see your presentation.
Can you see the presentation mode? Yeah, okay. Now, the overview will deal with extracting riverbed materials in the East Zone rivers. This picture is courtesy Siddharth from Kolkata side. And you can see a lot of boats with sand miners in them. They actually jump into the river, scoop out the sand. And way far back, which you can't see, are the big excavation activities going on. The major rivers of the East Zone, this is a lousy map. It doesn't have Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, and Odisha in it. Also missing are rivers like the Punpun and the Phalgu that join the southern side of the Ganga in Bihar. You have Ajay is missing in Jharkhand, coming in from Jharkhand. And of course, the Mahanadi, Baitarni, etc. in Odisha are missing. On the Brahmaputra side, I don't see the Dibang and the Dihang rivers. The northern side of Ganga, I don't see Budi Ganga and I don't see Mahananda. So those are, to my mind, some of the major rivers. This map will be completed later. The amazing thing about the East Zone rivers is that these are the richest rivers in terms of their annual water and sediment volume that they bring down, primarily because of the Himalayan rivers. The Himalayan rivers are said to be energy limited in the lower reaches. They bring down a lot of sand from high elevations, but once they enter the plains, their bed slope becomes minimal, and therefore a lot of energy is required to push the sediments along, and we call them energy limited. The non-Himalayan rivers are relatively, they contain less sand, they contain more gravels, and we call them supply limited. The rivers are very rich in aquatic floral and faunal biodiversity. Some of my colleagues wanted me to point out that the Son River sands are highly preferred for structural purposes. Why that is so, Professor Sinha will tell us. The Farakka and other barrages limit the supply of sediments to the Ganga Delta. Sand mining and dredging, though their impact is less, they add to the problem. And we all know that deltas need more sediments so that things like mangroves can proliferate and mitigate the impact of cyclones. At the same time, the presence of sand islands can help reduce saline intrusions. And as we know that because of climate change, the ocean levels are rising or due to rise, the sand islands are disappearing. Therefore, we need more sediments reaching our deltas. The biggest impact that we can foresee is that of dredging in the Hooghly Ganga River, all the way from Haldia to Allahabad, over 1,000 kilometers, probably about half the length of the Ganga, for the national waterway. And this is a major threat to the Gangetic River dolphin, which we have crowned as our national aquatic animal. You can see a picture of a dredger at work by Subhashish Day from ATREE. Very quickly, the geomorphological and hydrological impacts. The amount of sediments that are brought is so much in the north that the sediments can change the river courses. A little story, 1977, early 77, I was crossing the Ganga with Karpuri Thakur, and from Patna to Hajipur, a distance of several kilometers, was the width of the river, right from the banks of Patna, the ghats of Patna, up to Hajipur. 40 years later, I had a chance to go to the same ghats in Patna, and this is the scene that I saw. The river seemed to have disappeared. Okay? It has shifted 5 to 6 kilometers away from the Patna ghats. Primarily, they say, because of the mining that goes on upstream of Patna. One of the consequences of heavy sand mining or sediments mining is the erosion of banks and embankments in most states of eastern India. Once the banks and embankments go, the water tends to flood the land. There is also loss of farmland, and that affects livelihoods. We are seeing that the stability of various structures, buildings, bridges, embankments, and dikes are threatened by huge amounts of illegal sand mining or sediments mining. On the right, you see a picture of Dibrugarh. Some of you may recall from your readings that in the earthquake of 1950, led to a slight sinking of parts of Dibrugarh below the level at which the Brahmaputra was flowing. To prevent the flooding of the town, dikes were built, and today what the sand mining is doing is that it is endangering the structural stability of the Dibrugarh town protection dikes. Uh, we have some, today I haven't brought them, but there are visuals of the Karmanasa bridge in Bihar. Uh, there are buildings in Kolkata. One is a very famous building, the Patalbadi building, the Red Cross Society building, that are all being developing cracks, and their foundations are getting affected. And also, as probably Sudarshan Das will tell us later, how houses and buildings on the banks of the Subarnarekha are being affected by the illegal mining. Illegal mining or legal mining of sediments leads to lowering of groundwater levels. Uh, the example I have mentioned here is of the Kulsi River in the Brahmaputra basin and the drying of irrigation canals in Jharkhand. In both cases, the local paddy cultivation, which is the main crop, gets affected. In the ecological impacts, I feel a bit embarrassed talking about this because I find that Nachiket is sitting here and he's the expert. But I can say that sand mining and dredging releases sometimes heavy metal ions that are otherwise locked in the sediments into the water columns, along with pathogens. It was this kind of pollution in the Thobal River in Manipur which led to a lot of protests. A little more about this later. The aquatic biota form microbenthic organisms, the tiniest of organisms, to the dolphins, the largest. They are all going to be very heavily impacted by the national waterway dredging. There is, I've given some examples here. There's the hilsa, the prized fish for the Bengalis, which is reducing in numbers in the Hooghly. There are several causes for it, but sand mining only adds to the problem. The Gangetic dolphin, I have already mentioned that in all the three rivers where it is found in the east, the four rivers, it is being affected by the mining and particularly the dredging activity that is now begun. In this slide, I have brought the animals and the birds that bask on the sand islands or sandbars or make their nests on these features. There's the Indian skimmer and the black-bellied tern affected in the Mahanadi, the Gangetic soft-shelled turtle affected in the Mahanadi Gandak, Karyal affected in the Son, Gandak and Mahanadi rivers. But it was interesting to read in a news report that one village in Sikkim, which didn't know what otters were, when they found out what otters were, they started to take care of them and ensure that they are not swept away during the mining. Social impacts. One of the saddest social impacts is that of children drowning accidentally at illegal mining sites while they are playing. And these kinds of reports are coming in from almost every state. I have scanned the reports from Bihar, Jharkhand, Odisha, Assam, and there are a few others which I have not really been able to read. Because illegal mining is often highlighted or brought to light or opposed by activists, communities, media persons, and officials, the illegal miners or sand mafia, as they are popularly referred to or unpopularly referred to, they resort to violence against them. As I mentioned earlier, that bank erosion and lowering of the water tables leads to loss of livelihoods for farmers, as also for fishers suffer in Bihar, Jharkhand, West Bengal, Assam, Odisha, most of the rivers states, except Nagaland, where mining is in progress. We come to laws and governance. Well, illegal mining is rampant across all the East Zone states except Nagaland. Nagaland gets its supplies from one district in Assam, Karbi Aglong. Then you have, because local communities also tend to suffer a lot, they have challenged illegal mining at the sites, before government officials, and in the courts. Very often, media reports tell us about these incidents and the consequences. But governments, unfortunately, depend on the exploitation or plunder of all kinds of natural resources in order to generate revenues. And this is a particular problem with the state governments. There are allegations of corruption against officials, politicians, and political parties, but it doesn't seem to faze them. Though some officers and ministers from time to time do take courageous action. I wanted to just cite one example here, which is that of the Manipur state, where the Gopal River Conservation Committee brought a petition or series of petitions before the High Court. And the High Court passed an interim order banning all unauthorized mining and quarrying in the state rivers. Now, the quarry workers who suddenly became unemployed and transporters joined hands in protest, and they organized bands, which led to the state government backing down, and it began issuing temporary permits to some of the private firms. If we look at it today, which is about 2 years, 3 years later, the situation on the ground remains unchanged, illegal mining goes on. And that's the story from every state, almost all the cases. The courts, unfortunately, can only pass orders. They have to be still executed by the state. And there will be, I think, 2 more cases will be discussed at least in this program today. One is from the Son River, just upstream of Patna. Our friend Gopal Krishna will discuss at the end. And Dr. Sudarsan Das will talk about the Subarna Rekha case, the NGP. Way forward. Very easy to talk about it, very hard to get anything significant achieved. But the guiding principle has to be that we extract only the annual replenished amount. We should try to reduce the demand for sand. Again, this is easier said than done. People talk about manufactured sand, M sand. People talk about imports, but that is really transferring the problem somewhere else. There is talk about using alternate materials. We use less cement and concrete. Maybe we hark back to stone and mud, which is also very good construction material. We try and go in for different technologies. We try and change our architecture and building styles. All these are possible. But so far, I have not come across much success in all of these. And I'm particularly worried about the chopping down of hillocks to get sand. I've seen from here to all the way to Mubarakpur in Himachal Pradesh, where entire hillocks are disappearing. Then we definitely need more research to identify safe extraction sites. Again, Professor Sinha will tell us more about that, as well as we need to identify areas that are strictly no-go, protected areas like the Sundarbans, Ramsar sites, and wildlife sanctuaries, etc. We need replenishment studies. Again, Professor Sinha will tell us more about that to quantify how much we can extract in a given year. We have to devise methods for the release of sediments that are held behind dams and barrages. These are not yet easily done. We need to identify extraction procedures and technologies for the authorized sites. Guidelines have to be improved. And if some of you may remember, Parul Gupta, the lawyer, told us in the first web dialogue that they should be river-centered or river-focused. Is Professor Brij Gopal in the audience today? Because he has written a very good note on some of the issues related to the guidelines and how they can be river-focused. One size cannot fit all. The streams and rivers is something that I learned from Professor Gopal. 5-hectare size in a river like Ganga may appear small, but in a tiny stream flowing from Dehradun to the Ganga, it's a lot. It may mean mining along almost a kilometer or more of the river because it's a narrow river. We need to look at the morphology of the river. Is it a river that doesn't shift or does it shift? If it shifts and goes from one district to the other district, then what happens to the jurisdiction, etc.? We certainly require better law enforcement. But for that, we need to create a political will that must make a commitment to sustainable extraction. Now, many of us might think, यार ये कैसे होगा? ये तो संभव ही नहीं है. आज के राजनेताओं से ये कैसे आशा कर सकते हो? But I remember back in the early 80s, when the first serious protests against clear felling of forests was launched after the Chipko movement in the 70s, across the nation, people came together, challenged the government regulations, and we got much better approach to managing our forests. I will be honest and admit that I don't know if some of the illegal deforestation is still taking place on a massive scale, but my guess is that it has definitely reduced compared to the early 80s. And finally, none of this works if our economic development models remain centered on unlimited growth. And there I can end with Gandhiji's caution that the earth has enough for everybody's needs, but not for our greed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ravi. हाँ जी, आपने you took about 4 minutes extra, which is okay. Which is fine.
I had somebody sitting here with a timer. He didn't want me.
No, that's fine. Thank you so much. That was a lovely overview, and the last bit was particularly specific to the kind of larger issues that plague this whole business of river mining and how we go forward. I'd like to move on to our next speaker, Professor Rajiv Sinha. Rajiv ji is a professor of earth sciences at IIT Kanpur, the Indian Institute of Technology there. He's worked on various aspects of river hydrology and groundwater systems throughout his career, and has published more than 150 papers and has enormous bandwidth in the academic space in this regard. He's a Humboldt Fellow of 2000, a National Mineral Award recipient, and several other awards as well. And there's absolutely no doubt of the enormous amount and the significance of the contributions he has made to the space. Professor Sinha, over to you. I will turn on the video after 8 minutes, just to give you a hint that
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Malavika, to introduce me. There has been a lot of talk about the general aspects of sand mining, sand extraction, whatever you want to call it. And, Ravi has already given a very nice overview. So I decided not to repeat any of those stuff and present to this audience a slightly different perspective. And that's what my title says, sediment dynamics vis-a-vis sand extraction. And I am deliberately not using the word sand mining. We have been discussing about it for some time. Now, this is a discussion on the eastern zone, and which is kind of dominated by the Himalayan rivers, which are known to be very, very highly sediment laden. And particularly when you reach the lower part of the Ganga system, the situation becomes, very, very serious. We all understand from the river process understanding that in-channel sedimentation is a natural process, but it has been very largely aggravated by the human interventions like the barrages, the dams, the embankments, and so on. Many of us also understand that the in-channel sedimentation is, spatially non-uniform. A 2,500 kilometer river does not, show sedimentation every place. There are hotspots of siltation, depends upon the rates of deposition. And then we also have to have some idea of the accumulated sediment volume, as was just pointed out. And therefore, in many of these rivers which are draining through this region, some sort of a strategic sand extraction may be required. And that is important to maintain the sediment regime of a river to an acceptable level, and of course, to prevent any other serious disaster. I'll try to demonstrate some of that as well. We also know that sand is required for various human needs, and but then unfortunately, there are no good practical alternatives available. But having said that, I am not a fan of sand mining or sand extraction, whatever you want to call that. I do believe very strongly that the indiscriminate sand extraction is totally disastrous for the river. And therefore, we need to assess the river processes and have a reasonable estimate of the extractable sand. And that has to be based on the scientific studies. And I'll show you some data. I also believe that there is no lack of policy in our country. And a good example is the most recent MoEF 2020 guidelines. And if that is implemented in toto, I think a lot of problems can actually be solved. But then there is a lack of process understanding. There is probably also a lack of administrative will and perhaps means and resources for implementation. Now, this is the pretext on which my next few slides will be based on. And so therefore, the challenge before us, how to strike a balance between the human needs and the river ecosystem protection. This actually, resonates with the last point which Ravi just made about, the slogan from Mahatma Gandhi, for example. Okay, now let me give you a perspective of what are we talking about. I mean, we need to have some idea of the sediment volume and budget we are talking about in some of these rivers, right? This is an example of the sediment budget of the Kosi River, which is draining parts of North Bihar. And if you do a very quick sediment budgeting, literally back of the envelope calculation, you will see that after the river comes out of the mountain front around Chopra, between Chopra and Birpur, we are talking about something like 408 million meter cubes of sediment, which might have accumulated since the embankment construction. And similarly, we may be talking about more than 1,000 million tons meter cube of sediments which have accumulated between Birpur and Baltara. Okay, so these are obviously first order volumes. We also did some work based on the historical scale planform analysis, primarily mapping, where and where these bars are accumulated, converting those bar area into volumes, and we came up with this kind of hotspots of siltation. And if you superimpose on the top of it, the breaches which have occurred in the last 30, 40 years of time, you will see a very strong, coincidence of where the hotspots of siltation are and where the hotspots of breaches are. So therefore, there has to be some relationship between these hotspots of siltation and the breaching in the embankment. There are other reasons as well, and there are some points which are not, obviously, all of the points are not coinciding with these hotspots, but there are many. And this is a river which is also referred as many times a super elevated river, because in many places the river bed is actually 4 to 5 meters higher than the surrounding floodplain. So we are talking about, this is the kind of a scenario here. Let's look at another example from the lower Ganga system. And this is a figure which some of you might have seen, the talk I gave a couple of years ago. And again, here we have combined the hotspot of siltation along with the river dynamic scenarios as well. So where are the river dynamics, is more operative and so on. And again, if you look at, we also calculated the volumes of sediment which have accumulated, in each of these sectors between Buxar and Patna, for example, Patna and Hatida and so on. And we, if you look at again the total numbers between Buxar and Farakka, we are talking about something like more than 3,000 million meter cubes of sediment. And out of that, at least 1,600 million meter cubes are actually extractable, which is basically the zones which are, highest in terms of the siltation hotspots and so on, right? Now, this is understandable because we are talking about the lowermost stretch of the Ganga. These are very flat, low slope regions. A very good number of highly sediment charged rivers are joining and so on. So there are reasons which we all understand. Please also note that there is a much lower volume of sediments here between the Azimabad and Farakka stretch. And there are two possible explanations for that. One, that most of it is accumulated, here itself, and the other that is a methodological issue because this is stretch, particularly upstream of the Farakka. They are mostly ponded because of the reservoir, because of the barrage, and therefore the aggradation or the bars are not clearly visible. Okay, so let's also ponder a little bit about, there is no doubt to the fact that the Farakka barrage has acted as a major barrier for the sediment dynamics. It may not have caused a lot of sedimentation, but there are enough evidences to show that. But then, combined with that, it has certainly created a sediment starvation in the GBM delta, and the result of that is pretty obvious here. You can see huge amount of land dynamics happening here. Many of these islands have disappeared, and of course there are also reported sand mining in the Hooghly River, which might have complemented to this whole problem. And I think there is going to be another talk on that as well. I also wanted to very quickly highlight the use of the modern technologies for doing this kind of assessment. This is a very recent project which we did in the upper parts of the Ganga, where we use the drone technology to actually estimate how much of the sand extraction has actually happened. And this is quite possible, to do, some of these things. You can also note the huge amount of changes which have happened, for example, between 1973 and then May 2020, when we took this image. You can see huge amount of land degradation. And then for this area, we also calculated the amount of sand which has been extracted and so on. I can talk a little bit more about this maybe later. But then the question is that what should be done here? What are the next steps? So one thing which is very, very clear, that we need to understand the process dynamics or process understanding of the sediment dynamics. We need an end-to-end solution. We need, of course, we may have to extract the sand from some places, but then we also must understand the impact of that. We must also have an utilization plan. There is absolutely no doubt to have into consideration the environmental concerns for excessive sand extraction. As I said, MoEF 2020 guidelines is good enough if we can implement it. But then in general, what I mean to mention here, that we need a very comprehensive sediment management plan. And this is basically an outline of this kind of a plan, which we need to develop. We need to know where the sediments are, how much are the sediments, how we develop these protocols, and what are the next possible steps here.
Sir, you have 2 minutes left.
Yeah, thank you. There was a special request from Ravi to highlight why Himalayan sands and cratonic sands are different. And I have included a slide here again. This also explains why the cratonic sands are much more in demand, because they are coarser, they are feldspar rich, they are more resistant, and therefore preferred for construction activities. In contrast, Himalayan sands are actually mica rich, and they are very highly weatherable. The grain size is very fine, particularly in the lower part of the, of the Ganga, and therefore they are not preferable for the construction activities. But there are other possible uses as well, and that also explains why why these are also extracted and so on. So I'll finish up with this slide by saying that these are some specific recommendations, and as I said, this is an addition to the MoEF 2020 guidelines. I didn't want to repeat it. I do believe that we must define some kind of a reference state of a river where you would like to mine or where you would like to not mine. And that has to depend on the morphological characteristics and ecological state of the river. Then, the channel dynamics, bank erosion, all of these processes must be put into consideration apart from the identification of the hotspots of siltation, which I talked about. We must also determine as a policy and as a scientific basis what is the maximum depth of extraction which is allowed. And a very basic thumb rule is that you must not extract more than what is being deposited here. There have also been talked about the extracting sand not from the main channel but from the filled paleo channels, and that sometimes can create also problem because they are many times very good groundwater recharge zones as well. And then I would end by saying that all ecological hotspots, wherever they are, whichever river they are, they must be defined as the no-go areas. So I'll stop here for today, and then we may be able to pick up some of these points when we come to the discussion session. Thank you so much for your attention and also for a few minutes of extra time, Malavika. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sinha. That was, as usual, an extremely interesting discussion, which you put in some of the ideas that you put forward. I found it particularly interesting that the use of technology needs to be more widespread on the ground when we are studying something like this, particularly in the sense of monitoring and overall identification of larger states of rivers before we move forward into this. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Nachiket Kelkar. I think many of us already know him quite well. He's well known as an expert on the biodiversity of rivers, particularly river dolphins and fisheries. He's currently in the process of submitting. He has submitted his thesis at ATREE on the socio-ecological aspects of fishery conflicts in the Gangetic Basin. He's also a member of the IUCN Citation Specialist Group. Nachiket, over to you. 8 minutes, I will turn on my video.
Sure.
Thank you.
Is my screen visible, Dr. Malavika?
Yes, your screen is visible. Your screen.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm going to focus mainly on the impacts of river ecology and environment, impacts on ecology caused by sand mining, but I'm also going to include river bottom dredging because it's particularly relevant to the East Zone rivers. This is a map of the East Zone with some of the basins that were missed earlier also included here, like the Mahanadi, Subarnarekha, Brahmani, Baitani, and some of the other smaller rivers as well. Why the East Zone is also important because of two important mega projects. The first is the Inland Waterways Project in India, where nearly 6,000 kilometers of waterways are planned on rivers of the Eastern Zone in the Ganga, Brahmaputra, Hooghly, and Mahanadi basins. And also because this is considered as one of the supply regions for the river interlinking, big mega project of river interlinking. Because the general notion among policymakers and proponents of river interlinking is that this zone has a surplus of water and an excess of sediment. Now, river interlinking clearly means that sediment fluxes are going to be altered in a major way, especially to the delta, and which is likely to have a large-scale effect also on the productivity of the Bay of Bengal shelf, where all these rivers and their sediments ultimately drain. So I'm going to focus first on the modes of sand mining. Typically, sand mining, we can classify it into two broad categories. And so this is a cross-section of a river seen from the direction of the flow, standing against it. And you can see here that there are these terraces. This is the river valley where the active channels are flowing, and the floodplains, which are the parts of the banks which are actively under the influence of the currently flowing channels. So broadly, we classify sand mining as in-stream sand mining, floodplain mining, which is concentrated here, and terrace mining, which is above. And there are different methods employed for different types of mining. The most common being the digging of deep, wet and dry pits, but also in-stream mining, which is another major way of mining sand, as well as there are other ways like bar scalping, where these deposits of fresh sediment are mined by skimming of the surfaces of the bars. Now, if we look at, this is just a simplified version taken view of the river floodplain from top at Bhagalpur in Bihar. And here you can see that there are fresh floodplain deposit, there is older floodplain terrace, and some other features. Now, all of these features are, they're not empty, or they're not just lying there. They're used by different elements of biodiversity. Even the connectivity between these floodplain wetlands and the river is very important for the larval dispersal of fish. Sandbars are important for many species of nesting birds. They are also important basking sites for turtles and gharials. Not only that, all these rivers also have some dependence of people. So all these species are coexisting with some level of human activity, but probably they can't take greater disturbances which are brought about by sand mining. The second part is, of course, related to river bottom dredging. And this has been a major component, especially maintenance dredging of the Ganga River and also Brahmaputra and some other rivers, for maintaining the least available depth for ships and vessels to ply along the national waterways. Now, river bottom dredging can be a fairly environmentally impactful activity, and we can summarize it as 4 R's. So what it involves is the mobilization of sediment from the river beds, especially where large sediment deposits exist. Then that sediment gets resuspended in the water column. That leads to release of heavy metals and pollutants, also biological contaminants like fecal coliforms, for example, which persist in the river. So there are residual effects of dredging even after dredging operations stop, which can lead to risks for ecology and different species, especially those living in river. Dredging is also serious because it can impair the pollution buffering capacity of sediment deposits. And in Bihar and West Bengal in particular, this is important from the point of view of arsenic, which is a geogenic heavy metal, which is quite abundant and is also toxic to human people drinking water, which is concentrated with arsenic. So dredging can actually mobilize arsenic in the river water also. In terms of effects on vegetation, of course, in-stream mining and dredging can have bad detrimental effects on aquatic plants. It's also seen that after floodplain and terrace mining, because the sand surface gets opened up, there may be an increase in riparian tree cover. Now, this is important because it appears positive, but such an increase in riparian tree cover can actually affect the habitat of floodplain nesting or sand-dwelling species living there. Impacts on invertebrates and planktons have also been studied to some extent in the east zone. And the general finding is that plankton species richness and abundance declined at heavy levels of sand mining, and also by the bank erosion induced by the waves during dredging operations and even barge traffic in the Ganga and Hooghly rivers. And similar impacts are likely due to mining or dredging disturbances on insects, freshwater mussels, prawns, shrimps, etc. And as we know, these invertebrates are the major supporting component of riverine trophic webs, and also support many ecosystem services, in particular fisheries, because fish depend on the invertebrate and planktonic biomass. And I think fish and fisheries are easily going to be the most impacted by both sand mining and river bottom dredging because of changes in turbidity, reduction in dissolved oxygen, increases in fine sediment flux, which can have a smothering effect on fish eggs and larvae. Also, floodplain mining can impact young fish because they tend to move into the side channels or the floodplain wetlands during the flood season, grow there for a year and come back. And deformities and injuries have also been noted on some fish immediately after mining from some rivers. One interesting example is from the Gandak River, where many fishermen are involved in the capture of aquarium fish species. And these are like loaches and guramis, like a loach that is shown over here. These species actually prefer gravel and cobbles and pebbles in the river bed. And cobble mining has also now become a lucrative small-scale business for the fisher there, especially aggregate removals of cobble. And because of which, they're in a way, the mining activity might end up depleting the aquarium fish, which also is an important contribution to their livelihoods. The impacts on turtles and crocodiles are expected mainly from reduction in breeding success, because floodplain nesting sites are directly disturbed by sand mining. But sand mining could also lead to changes in the thermal regimes and water turbidity nearby. These thermal regimes of sand are important because if sand temperatures change in a major way, then that can affect the sex determination of the hatchlings of turtles and crocodiles. Impacts on bird nesting sites and habitats. Now, these are particularly known in the Mahanadi River, where we have threatened species like the Indian skimmer and the black-bellied tern. But also there have been some reports on on threats from sediment mining to black-necked cranes and white-bellied herons, both of which are endangered species and which are found in Northeast India. Even animals like smooth-coated otters tend to use sandbars and islands for resting and socializing activities and breeding. This is a picture of an otter that we had seen in Bhagalpur, and it was happily resting. It was actually asleep when we tried to approach it. And such sandbars are therefore useful for such animals also. Now, in terms of Ganges River dolphins, one of the major threat is a potential threat is thought to be from river dredging. Now, detailed studies are urgently needed, and I think some of them are also in progress in some parts. But in general, what we see is that dolphins tend to avoid intensively dredged channels. There is also some combined stress from sediment disturbance and some noise from the dredging operations, which can interfere with their feeding activity. And we ourselves have seen very subdued activity and longer diving times in river dolphins in areas like Bhagalpur when dredging was going on. Studies by Wildlife Institute of India have shown that there has been a reduction in dolphin habitat use and also in fishing activity after an increase in sand mining in the Kulsi River in Northeast India. And similar impacts are also noted for the Barak River. So in summary, what we see is that there are variable impacts of different types of sand mining on different species. So depending on the kind of mining and the species involved and affected, we are likely to see different impacts. Secondly, we see that rivers that are already highly regulated, like you take the examples of the Son, Damodar and Tista, and if we map out rivers in terms of, on the x-axis, you see the current status of river biodiversity in these rivers and the sand mining and dredging impacts on the y-axis. And these rivers have lost their original biodiversity. Like the river dolphins are, for example, extinct from the Son River in Bihar. And the impacts of sand mining and dredging are also high. Whereas the Gandak, Brahmaputra are better in terms of the persisting river biodiversity and have relatively lower levels of sand mining or dredging.
Sir, you will have to end now.
Yes, there are also interesting cases like the Mahanadi River, where the current status of river biodiversity is high or better, but it's also affected by sand mining and dredging impact. So this just gives a broad scale view of what is the the relationship between currently persisting biodiversity in these rivers and the existing sand mining or dredging impacts. How much time I've got?
You're pretty much done.
Okay. So I think I'm going to skip this part because this will be discussed further. I'm going to end here because often there are demands for sand mining rights by local communities. These sand mining rights are often justified by saying that we have been traditionally harvesting sand. Like in Uttar Pradesh, many fishing communities are demanding sand mining rights for themselves. And often we think of these as small scale and nice alternatives to mafia-led activities, and probably they are. But also we have to seriously think about this, whether what is called a sloss argument for sand mining, whether we can permit single large mining operations or several small, because both are likely to have similar impacts on local biodiversity and ecology. So this is just something that we could discuss further. And with that, I would like to end my talk. And I thank you for the time given to me.
Thank you so much, Nachiket, for that extremely interesting presentation. And personally, one of my favorite areas of interest, as Professor Gopal, who's also on this call, can stand witness, the disturbance theory in river ecology, in which we talk about nutrient movement between the wetlands, upland, and the main flows of the river, appears to be pretty much turned on its head when we see areas with sand mining, and that would then, impact the entire dynamics all the way down. Thank you so much for that, Nachiket. That is extremely interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to request Jharna ji, who will be giving the next talk, Ms. Jharna Acharya. Jharna is a social worker and a researcher of folk culture, indigenous culture, and archaeology. She's been working consistently with many people's movements on the ground, unions, groups for the rights of marginalized people, and to strengthen organizations. Jharna ji, you're there?
जी.
Yeah, हाँ जी. Please.
जी.
आपका है. Please take the floor.
सभी को नमस्कार.
आपकी आवाज है, थोड़ा सा आपका
हिंदी.
झरना दी आपने बांग्लाते बोलून. आपने बांग्लाते बोलून.
जो कंफर्टेबल है आप उसमें बोलो.
अच्छा. নদীতে যে বালি উত্তোলনের প্রসঙ্গ নিয়ে আজকে আলোচনা হচ্ছে. আজকে 21শে নভেম্বর আমরা মৎস্যজীবীরা বিশ্ব মৎস্যজীবী দিবস পালন করছি. আমাদের মূল স্লোগান হচ্ছে জল বাঁচাও, মাছ বাঁচাও, মৎস্যজীবী বাঁচাও.
ঝর্ণা দি আপনার ভিডিওটা অফ করে দেবেন. ভিডিওটা অফ করবেন.
হ্যাঁ,
ভিডিও অফ করলে আওয়াজ ভালো আসবে.
বালি উত্তোলন প্রসঙ্গে প্রথমেই বলতে চাই যে আমরা সব সময় বলছি যে মাটির নিচে জল যে আমরা তুলে নিচ্ছি তাতে আমাদের পানীয় জলের একটা বড় সংকট দেখা দিচ্ছে. শুধু সংকট নয়, পানীয় জল দূষিত হচ্ছে. সেখানে আমরা বলছি বৃষ্টির জল ধরো, জল ভরো ইত্যাদি প্রকল্পও নিয়ে আসছি. কিন্তু যখন আমরা নদী প্রসঙ্গে আসি তখন দেখি নদীর যে জল ধারণ ক্ষমতা সেটা হচ্ছে নদীর বালি. অথচ আমরা নদীতে মেশিন বসিয়ে তার নিচে নদীর বুকের ওপরে মেশিন বসিয়ে তার নিচে থেকে বালিগুলো তুলে নিচ্ছি এবং তার ভেতরে 50 ফুট 60 ফুট করে একটা গর্ত করে নদীকে ক্ষতবিক্ষত করছি. এর ফলে দেখা যাচ্ছে নদীর জল ধারণ ক্ষমতা যেমন কমছে তেমনি নদীর স্রোতটাও কিন্তু কমে যাচ্ছে এবং ঘুরে যাচ্ছে. অপরদিকে নদীর পাড় ভাঙছে. এর ফলে আমি যদি বলি যে আমি যেখানে কাজ করি সুবর্ণরেখা এবং কংসাবতী নদী, সেখানে যদি আমি সুবর্ণরেখা প্রসঙ্গ তুলে নিয়ে আসি সেখানে দেখা যাচ্ছে যে নদীতে পুরো নদী এলাকা জুড়ে মৎস্যজীবীদের জীবিকা আজকে ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত এবং তারা ভীষণভাবে হতাশাগ্রস্ত. এই জায়গায় দাঁড়িয়ে যদি আমি দেখি যে 20 বছর আগে যেখানে নদীর পাড়ে মৎস্যজীবীদের সারাদিনের শেষে তাদের ভাতের চিন্তা করতে হতো না. নদীতে জাল নিয়ে গেলেই তারা মাছ পেতেন এবং মাছ বিক্রি করে তাদের সারাদিনের যে সংগ্রহ সেটা রোজগারটা তাদের একটা গ্যারেন্টি. সেই জায়গায় দাঁড়িয়ে আজকে সেই মৎস্যজীবীরা আজকে অন্য শ্রমিকে পরিণত হয়েছে. নদীর চরিত্র পাল্টে যাচ্ছে, জল নেই, মাছ নেই. প্রথমে নদীর যে বন্যার জলের জন্য যে সারফেসে যে বালিগুলো জমেতো সেগুলো তোলা.
Yes, Jharna di, I think the call has dropped.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, wait, she's back, I think. She's reconnecting. Give it a second.
Sorry.
হ্যাঁ Jharna di, আবার বলুন. নদী
সারা সারা সারফেসের বালিগুলো তোলা শুরু হয়, তাতে নদীতে জল কমে যাওয়া, মাছ কমে যাওয়ার ফলে যে মৎস্যজীবীরা বালি শ্রমিক হয়ে যান। কিন্তু পরে দেখা যাচ্ছে যে নদীতে একদম নদীর বুকে যে মেশিন বালি তোলা হচ্ছে, তার ফলে যেমন যে সমস্ত মৎস্যজীবীরা যারা এখনো নদীতে পড়ে থাকেন, তারা 1-2 মাসের মাছ ধরেন আর বাকি সময়টা তারা ট্রাভেলস তোলেন। এই জায়গায় দাঁড়িয়ে আমরা দেখতে পাচ্ছি যে নৌকোতে করে মৎস্যজীবীরা মাছ ধরতে যেতেন, এখন সেই নৌকোতে করে মৎস্যজীবীরা গ্রাভেলস তুলছেন। আমি যদি উদাহরণ দিই, লক্ষণ রাউত যিনি আদিবাসী বাইগা, তার নদীর পাড়ে, সুবর্ণরেখার পাড়ে তার বাড়ি, তিনি তার নৌকো ছিল, নৌকোতে মাছ ধরে জীবিকা করতেন। সেই নৌকো ভেঙে নষ্ট হয়ে গেছে, তিনি এখন দিনমজুর, কৃষি শ্রমিক, পরিযায়ী শ্রমিক। তো বর্তমানে এখন এই যে এরা নদীতে মাছ নেই, জীবিকা চলে যাচ্ছে, তুলে কিছুটা জীবিকা করার চেষ্টা করছে, এই জায়গাতেও কিন্তু আবার একটা বড় থাবা এসে পড়ছে এবং সেখানে আন্দোলন করে এদেরকে তাদের অধিকারটা রক্ষা করতে হচ্ছে। বর্তমানে আমরা সুবর্ণরেখার নদীতে যে ক্ষতগুলো তৈরি করে নদীকে শেষ করে মৎস্যজীবীরা জায়গায় দাঁড়িয়ে, ক্ষুদ্র মৎস্যজীবীরা নদীর বুকে যে দহ বা ঝিলগুলো তৈরি হচ্ছে, সেখানে তারা বিকল্প মাছ চাষের চেষ্টা করছেন। আমরা ডিএমএফ এবং কলকাতা দিশার সহায়তা ওই মৎস্যজীবীদেরকে মাছ চাষে উদ্বুদ্ধ করছি, সহায়তা করছি। একটা কথা আমি একটা কথা বলে শেষ করব যে নদীতে এই সুবর্ণরেখা নদী ঝাড়খণ্ড থেকে এসে পশ্চিমবঙ্গ ভেতর দিয়ে গিয়ে উড়িষ্যাতে পড়েছে। পুরো নদীটার সারা শরীর গুলোকে এই মেশিন বসিয়ে ক্ষতবিক্ষত করা হয়েছে। সুবর্ণরেখা নদী এখন মৃতপ্রায়। সেই নদীকে বাঁচানোর জন্য বা আরো আমাদের সারা ভারতবর্ষে আমরা যারা নদী নিয়ে বা মৎস্যজীবী নিয়ে কাজ করছি, নদী আন্দোলনের সঙ্গে যুক্ত আছে, আমরা পশ্চিমবঙ্গ রাজ্য নদী বাঁচাও যে আন্দোলন চলছে তার সাথে আমিও আছি। আমরা চেষ্টা করছি যে এই যে অবৈজ্ঞানিক এবং যথেচ্ছ যে বালি তুলে নদীগুলোকে শেষ করে দেওয়ার একটা যে অপচেষ্টা চলছে, সেখানে আমরা মানুষকে সংগঠিত করি। নদী মানে শুধু মৎস্যজীবী নয়, সেখানে কৃষি শ্রমিক আছেন, সেখানে আরো অন্য ধরনের জীবিকা যারা করে আছেন, তাদের যাতে
Siddharth, we'll give it a minute or two.
Hello.
Yeah, I think হ্যাঁ ঝর্ণা দি বলুন।
হ্যাঁ, তো সেই জায়গায় আজকে সভ্যতা নদীর ওপরেই গড়ে উঠেছিল, আর সভ্যতা মানুষের জীবিকা বাঁচবে। তো একে আদিবাসীরা যেমন জঙ্গল হারাচ্ছেন, অন্যদিকে মৎস্যজীবীরা তাদের জল হারাচ্ছেন। জলের অধিকার এবং মৎস্যজীবীদের অধিকারের জন্য আমরা নদী বাঁচানোর আন্দোলনের চেষ্টা করছি। আজকের এই যে আলোচনা, এই আলোচনাতে আমি অনেক কিছু জানলাম, শিখলাম। অনেক ধন্যবাদ।
ধন্যবাদ ঝর্ণা দি, আপনি শেয়ার করেছেন। এবারে আবার মিউট করে নেবেন, তারপরে কোয়েশ্চেন আনসার সেশন যখন হবে তখন আপনাকে আবার ডেকে নেব যদি কোয়েশ্চেন আসবে, ঠিক আছে?
झरना जी, बहुत थैंक यू, आपने अपने आंदोलन के बारे में बताया हम सबको, और जो आपने कहा है उसको आई थिंक सबको पता चला थोड़ा उसके बारे में, उसको आगे लेके चलेंगे किसी तरह। थोड़ा इसके ऊपर जब क्वेश्चंस आएंगे तो बाद में आपके पास हम वापस आएंगे। With a lot of thanks to Jharna ji, I'd like to move on to Mr. Sudarsan Das, who we know as the convener of the Mahanadi Bachao Andolan on one hand, and on the other hand, as a development thinker, as a leader, as a columnist, as an institution builder. He wears a lot of hats. He founded the Odisha Environment Congress and a platform of scientists and policy makers, open to everybody to work on issues related to the environment. And he has been pioneering many legal battles for the restoration of rivers in Odisha. Mr. Das?
Yeah. Good evening, everybody.
I'll turn on my video in 8 minutes as a hint.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good evening to everybody. And thank you very much for giving me this chance to share my views and my activities related to sand mining in the state of Odisha in general and Subarnarekha in particular. First, my presentation would be in two parts. One is about the case study that relates to the sand mining issues and my fight in the NGT to stop sand mining in river Subarnarekha. And the number two, the sand mining activities in the rest of the rivers of the state and the issues that we are confronted with every day. So with the first presentation about the sand mining in Subarnarekha, Siddharth, yeah. So this is the river basin of Subarnarekha that flows through Jharkhand, West Bengal and Odisha, and it travels 395 kilometer. And the sand mining stretch that I am going to, present, or the sand mining area, which was the focus of my intervention in NGT, that I will be discussing in the next slide. Yeah, this is the portion, 27 kilometer portion of the river that flows in Odisha. Before it reaches the Bay of Bengal, the portion which was very badly affected by sand mining in 1, 2 and 3 tahsils of Balasore district, that was the major cause of concern for all of us and the people in that locality. And this is, the river that is on the border of West Bengal and Odisha. And in the bordering area, there is one district called Midnapur, and the other district of Odisha is Balasore. And the people of Balasore, I mean the Odisha, they faced a lot of problems due to reckless and rampant sand mining by the sand mafias from West Bengal as well as from Odisha also. And in this 27 kilometer in length, there are 10 mining blocks which have been missed out, and many other sand mining blocks are there which are illegally done. And these 10 mining blocks which has been leased out to different people, they are given particular area like 6 hectares or 10 hectares, but in reality they go much beyond the demarcated area of allocated by the government. Next. Yeah, already, please they are doing it in Subarnarekha sand mining. This is already been discussed. You may skip it, Siddharth. Yeah, there are some images in different moja, I mean the different patches where sand mining is being conducted. So I don't think we need to spend more time on this. Next. That you can see the river Subarnarekha is known as a Hoyangho of North Odisha, North Balasore, because this river changes its course at different times, and in the past, in many occasions, the river has changed its course, and this erosion of the river bank is mostly due to sand mining that you can see. And this erosion of sand mining has caused the loss of houses, loss of various structures in the villages, including temples, including schools, school buildings, and also the houses of the people. And surprisingly, I made a study in 3 panchayats, and I found more than 300 households, they have lost their land inside the river. Not only that, their homestead land and agricultural land also have been merged or have been vanished in the sea, in the river itself. So you can just imagine the kind of the kind of impact of sand mining in this particular area of 27 kilometer, and how the people are really facing problems. And when they face these kind of problems, all illegal mining, and then mining unscientifically, using heavy machines, swamps, all those things, that has caused a lot of damage to their livelihood, and the overall ecology of the river. So taking that as a kind of a clue, the people went to different officials in the government, from Tahsildar to collector to RDC, the chief minister, and approached all the doors but failed in getting justice. So subsequently, when I came to know this and they approached me, we went to NGT, and in 2016, we filed the petition and requested justice from the NGT. And in 2018 September, we got the order from the NGT, and that was a very very landmark judgment, I would say. 23 pages judgment, and in which the salient points are that the NGT said strict action against the miners, illegal miners, must be taken, including criminal proceedings. And it's not only limited to the miners, it also includes the officers who are responsible for this kind of reckless and irresponsible mining. So that was the order. Then the number 2 important aspect was the NGT directed that the adequate compensation.
Hello, Mr. Das?
Yeah, he's not audible.
Is he on?
Yeah, he's still there, but I can't hear him either.
He's not on mute, right? Because I can't see him at all.
No, I can see him. He's not on mute.
Mr. Das, we can't hear you. Maybe you need to log on again. Siddharth, can you send him a text or something?
Yeah, I'm doing that, yes.
बिजली तो नहीं चली गई?
हाँ जी, बिल्कुल हो
He was on his phone. Oh, he's here back.
Oh, back phone.
So, hello, am I audible?
Carry on. We
Yeah.
can hear you.
Yeah, so the cost of riverbed materials also ecological restoration has to be studied, and the net present value of the future ecosystem service forgone, that was the kind of study that has to be made as per the NGT order. And the Indian Council of Forestry Research and Education, Dehradun, was given the responsibility for doing this. And the Pollution Control Board regional office at Bhubaneswar and West Bengal are also directed to I mean, to take up the study also. That was the kind of order given by the NGT. And last but not the least, to supervise all those directions, implementation of the direction, the NGT said that one judge from the High Court of Jharkhand would be responsible or would be engaged to see that the directions are or the judgment are implemented. So by now 2 years have passed. The irony is that after this order was passed in the NGT, lot of halla gulla were there and lot of chasing by the government, by the officials were made, and lot of halla gulla in the media also came up. But by now what we see, the usually what was done at that point of time, that again these mafia are controlling the river and the river bed and the sand mining as well. And subsequently to my filed by different people on different mining blocks, and they have gone and they have got some relief. And with that relief, when they are approaching the officers, unfortunately the direction or the instructions of the NGT are not implemented or carried out. That is the most irony that I see as of now in case of Subarnarekha sand mining issue.
Sir, you will have to end now.
Yeah. Coming to the overall Odisha situation, there are 12 rivers, main rivers in the state, and each of the river, excepting one, that is Bahuda River, in all these rivers, the sand mining is rampant, and really that is threatening the life of the river, including its ecology, including its environmental flow and the biodiversity which depend on these rivers. So thank you again for inviting me and making my presentation on sand mining in case of Odisha. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Das. Thank you so much for that. The whole battle on the legal system is a completely different area which needs a huge amount of emphasis and backing from the work happening on the ground of the issue. I would now like to invite Mr. Anupam Chakravarti. Mr. Chakravarti, you're here.
Malavika, I think Anupam has not been able to join us today for the call. So we'll go to the next speaker then.
We'll move on. All right. Then Dr. Lal, Dr. R.B. Lal is here. Sir, you are here?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Great. Thank you. Dr. Lal is currently an additional director and member secretary, expert appraisal committee with the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Personally, he has a PhD in chemistry and over 30 research papers published. In the past 2 decades, he's been closely associated with IIT Kanpur, the CPCB, and the MoEFCC. Dr. Lal, over to you. Do you have a presentation, sir?
No. I'm just.
Okay, you're going to speak. Great. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
We'll video in 8 minutes.
Yes. Thank you very much for this organizing this India River Week 2020. Is sand mining killing our rivers? I will talk about various rules, guidelines on sustainable sand mining, which are notified by the central government of India and state government concern. Basically, there are mostly 4 important pillars for this whole sustainable sand mining. One is the district authority, second is the state mines and geology department, third one is the Ministry of Mines, and MoEFCC also. Sand mining basically regulated in terms of MMDR Act and the mineral concession rule framed by the state government. Sand mining also required the environment clearance. If we see under 1994 EI notification, EI notification 94, there was no provision on requirement of environment clearance. But in 2006, greater than 5 hectare ministry notify the requirement of environment clearance. But after that, many of the people in the country, they just broken the bigger lease area into less than 5 hectares so that they did not require the environment clearance, and they started a lot of illegal mining in the country. Based on this, in March 2009, the then secretary, there was an important task force committee constituted, and the committee given very good recommendation in 2010 with respect to the minimum size should not be less than 5 hectare, minimum period of mine lease area to be defined, mine plan to be notified, cluster approach should be there, and various type of hydrogeological reports, stretch wise depth may be restricted to 3 meters or the water level which is less. And this report, because earlier there was no mining plan scheme in the country for this sand mining. Thereafter, this report basically forwarded to the state government to implement under their MCR rule. Based on this, very important landmark judgment of the Deepak Kumar versus State of Haryana, which given by the Honorable Supreme Court in February 2012. And under that, basically, the Honorable Supreme Court accepted the recommendation of this committee and give many type of direction to state government as well as Ministry of Environment, Forest, Ministry of Mines also. Further, the ministry went to various type of OM, Office Memorandum, guidelines and notification in May 2012, June 2013, and December, September 2013, and also mandated less than 5 hectares also required the environment clearance. But the problem is that because the rules or the requirement of various type of EMP report should not be for same for the 1 hectare, 2 hectare, 10 hectare, 25 hectare, 1000 hectare. It should be different. That's why in September 2015, we just came after a lot of studies and field visit, we just notified the draft notification. And this notification basically finalized in 15 January 2016. So basically, I was involved in this notification in January 2016. And this is the first time Ministry also prepared the sustainable sand mining guidelines. Ministry also categorized this whole project into category A, B1, B2. Though this notification later on challenged in Honorable Supreme Court and NGT also, many type of because अपने देश में क्या होता है, एवरीथिंग एक दूसरे के पीछे लगे होते हैं, बट बेसिकली इसका अगर ध्यान से देखें, दिस नोटिफिकेशन इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट बिकॉज we cannot impose all the parameters for equivalent to 100 hectare mine lease area if we talk about 1 hectare, because the impact of 1 hectare and 100 hectare may be different. And that time also ministry legalized this sustainable sand mining using clubbing this under the notification 2016. And first time in the history, if you see from the MoEFCC, the procedure of monitoring of sand river bed mining, that is the monitoring of mined out material, which is key to the successful implementation of sustainable environment management plan. And first time we also suggested the use of IT and IT-enabled services for effective monitoring, along with process re-engineering has been made the part of notification. The Honorable Minister, Present Minister, Shri Prakash Javadekar also during that time given too much emphasis on the movement of sand, how we to control using transit permit, and this permit to be unique barcode, unique QR code, and use of IT and IT-enabled service. That time very important. These monitoring mechanisms first time in the notification are given, and during that time also in 2016, the ministry notified this sustainable sand mining management guidelines, and this also and first time the ministry given 2-3 very important thing emphasizes like a district survey report. Earlier before this notification, there was no concept of district survey report and replacement study, how to do, where to do the mining, whether mining can be done in this particular area, where is this no-go zone, so that everything mentioned in this guidelines. If we can read the guidelines very systematic manner, this guidelines is very important. If we implement these guidelines, I will just give some of the idea what the guidelines. These guidelines talk about stakeholder engagement, sustainable mining practices, identification and preparation of mining site, monitoring of the mining of minerals and its transportation, how to manage the noise environment, air pollution, dust management, management of visual impact, biodiversity protection, and waste management, pollution prevention, protection of infrastructure, and how to do the closure and reclamation of mine dot area. But these rules are very good, guidelines are very good, but problem is that how do we do the implementation? Because the implementation lies with the state government at the district level. Initially we found a lot of problems with the state government also. Sometimes they are not agree also, because they are saying they don't have the manpower, they don't have the facilities. But these facilities, not the bigger facility, it's not a rocket science, it's a simple technology. Everybody in our country have the this Android mobile phone, they can do the tracking, everything can be done. Because the state have major, if we see the revenue generation from this sector, they can do if they want to do. Therefore, now based on various judgment and the ministry and many committees and it's very good work done by our many NGOs on this, how to manage this sustainable sand mining. In 2020, January 2020, finally ministry given some of the criterias. These are the prerequisites for starting a sand mining operation in the country. I'm just giving 4 or 5 important points. One is all district to prepare a comprehensive mining plan for the district. This is the prerequisite for the provision of district survey report. Because earlier what happens, just state government give randomly auction here and there and just open into the this auction, and they just in the paper take 2 hectare or 10 hectare or 20 hectare mine lease. But they, as my earlier colleague mentioned about, they just go beyond that thing. That's correct. That's why we prescribe the district survey report should give different various type of mine lease or khasra number, and they should be latitude, longitude to be fixed. It should not be here and there, so that anyone can do the tracking and checking. Second important thing is that replacement study should be there. And in the sustainable sand mining guidelines, ministry came up with, after the taken the guidance of various experts, how to do the replacement study, what are the formula, how to calculate, because it's not a simple thing. Many of the like IIT Kanpur had given very good study on this Ganga basin with respect to replacement study. And this all potential river mining zones shall be identified and put for auction. Not simple, proper geotech details should be there. Latitude, longitude to be mentioned. Provision of these guidelines should be considered while identifying potential stress, and LOI holder, letter of intent holder, shall seek the prior environment clearance under the provision of FEI notification 2006 based upon their mine lease area. And this monitoring infrastructure, including weighing bridge and adequate fencing on the lease area, CCTV camera, transport permit, everything should be mentioned. And this is a part of this auction document. If a mine lease holder, they don't have this facility, state mine department never to allow, give the allocation to such type of miners basically. And there is very, very important this using the this IT enabled technology. Regular monitoring of mined out metal is very important. Annual audit of each mining lease is also important. So overall, in some, I can say like that, these rules are very good. Central government, Ministry of Mines, MoEFCC formed very excellent rules and guidelines. After doing, taking various guidance from the expert in the country, and during the field visits, we found what type of rules and policies were there. But the implementation of sand mining is still in our country is not adequate in nature. So there should be an integration of central government, state government.
Thank you, Dr. Lal, if you can wind up.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. This is the in sum.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah. So yes, what you mentioned about the guidelines being in place and a lot of rules and regulations existing, but the implementation being the key and which is weak, of course, continues to be a major issue which we need to focus on going forward. I'd like to now introduce our last panelist, Dr. Gopal Krishna. Dr. Krishna, you're on?
Malavika, Siddharth here.
Yeah.
I don't seem to see Dr. Gopal Krishna. He was here like about 5 minutes back.
Dr. Krishna, are you on?
I don't see him in the list of panelists.
I think he's dropped out. Could you just quickly check with him on the phone?
Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah.
Really quickly. So I'll introduce him so that we'll save some time. Dr. Krishna is an advocate practicing in the Patna High Court, and he's a public policy researcher and a fellow with the institution in Germany. He's co-authored the disputes over the Ganga, Kosi deluge, the worst is yet to come, amongst other books and documents. He is the convener of the Ganga Bachao Samiti, along with a whole host of other institutions, and has been writing on the subject of ecosystem and hazardous industries for quite some time now for established magazines and publications, and has been working in this space for a long time now. So if he's here, we'll get my introduction will not go waste. Siddharth, is he here?
Let's wait for a minute. I'm also trying to call him, not being able to get through.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I'm not being able to reach his phone. Seems to be a network issue. Oh, okay.
He'll be around in a minute. Let's just wait. So once Dr. Krishna is completed his session, I would then hand over to my fellow moderator, Debashish. Debashish, as most of you would know, is the director of the People's Science Institute based out of Dehradun, and has spent many years working in the space of water conservation and rivers. And that he would be leading the question and answer session and the summary of the session. Let's hope Dr. Krishna joins us really quickly now.
Yeah, I think he's here.
Dr. Krishna, are you on?
Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Hi.
We've been waiting for you. Please carry on. I've introduced you when you weren't here, so we could save some time. So over to you, and I will turn on my video as an indicator in 8 minutes, and you'll have 2 minutes after that. Over to you.
Oh, thank you. Let me begin with the last thing first. In October 2014, the National Green Tribunal gave a judgment with reference to non-compliance with environmental laws, specifically the guidelines and the requirement for district survey report. The most newspapers reported it during the election time that in Bihar, the government has been taken to task for not ensuring compliance with the requirements under environmental law, including compliance with the Supreme Court order in the Deepak Gupta case. The order was actually specific to one district, which I think the most newspapers did not pay heed to. It was a and Bachao has 26 sand ghats. So the order was limited. The order was limited to only 26 ghats of Bachao district. And actually NGT missed the opportunity, as it has always been doing so, especially in the sand mining case, of applying the, ensuring that its order applies to all the districts. In Bihar, there are 23 districts There are some 400 sand ghats, and to the prominent districts where large number of sand ghats are there, they are in Patna, which has 50 sand ghats. There is Nevada, which has 59 ghats. And likewise, there are other districts in Bhojpur, there are 19 ghats. So the NGT last order did not apply to all these districts where more than approximately 400 sand ghats are there. This is what happened last in the NGT. I will go back to the entire issue of how rules have been framed and how non-compliance has been the norm and not compliance. Compliance is an exception here. So the order is important to take note of because it makes it clear the process through which each district has district magistrate in particular has to ensure compliance with the sustainable sand mining guidelines, and also Deepak Gupta judgment in the Deepak Gupta case. So the NGT made it clear that under clause 7A, 7 subclause 3A of the EIN notification, there has to be a district survey report prepared for every district, although it confined itself to Banka, but the observation referred to every district. And that survey report is for sand mining, riverbed mining, and mining of other minor minerals. And it is mandatory. But what was found in this case was that the district level impact assessment authority, which is not functional especially because of the NGT order in the Satyendra Pandey case, there was a requirement for a complete district survey report, which was never done. The fact is that it has not been done for any of the sand ghats, the complete survey report. So the paperwork is the order paperwork. So I examined the court of the Mines Commissioner in the Geology Department of Bihar, and it has grappled with some 419 cases. The 192 cases have been dealt with by this court in last 2 years. I'm not including the period of 2020, from 2017 to 2019. And prior to that, between 2014 to 2015, 16, the court dealt with some 227 cases. I will just mention one case and then I will deal with the other aspects of the compliance with the law. In one particular case in Bhojpur, in fact, two cases, Ravi had asked me to deal with this own case as well. In one particular case in Bhojpur, during the rainy season, the miner was found guilty of doing mining by creating a iron overbridge during rainy season, and it imposed a cost or penalty of 10 lakh rupees. So as of now, the Bihar government, before the new government came into being, in June 2020, it conducted a meeting where it found that in Bihar, some 70 crore collections have happened. The district DMF, the District Mineral Foundation, and only some 7 crores out of it have been spent or they are proposed to be spent. So it was lying, and it was said that during Corona, in the COVID-19 crisis, the fund can be used for COVID-19 related expenses. So in the Corona period, and I'm specifically referring to this part because I want to focus subsequently in a flashback of as to what happened earlier. All the mining leases in 23 districts of Bihar, they were to expire. Their mining lease was to expire on 31st October 2020. Now, because Bihar went to elections, the mining leases have been extended till the 31st December 2020. In the meanwhile, after the government came in just few days back, the Geology Department, the government of Bihar has appointed a nodal officer in the Geology Department for ease of doing business. And in the entire election season, the roads were full of illegal trucks being trucks using excavating and transporting sand. So, but there was complicity from the government side, from the for the election commission. Election was the priority, so mining did not feature in it, and the illegalities in mining did not feature in it. The aspect of what happened prior to the lockdown period is important to show you how compliance has been happening. In Bihar related matter, in the Son River, and also it also referred to Ganga River, in Amar Sakti versus the state of Bihar case, it's NGT gave an order in 2019 because there was a report, a documentary evidence of illegality being committed, illegal mining being committed in Son River and in Ganga River. The court, the Bihar government informed the court that it has initiated prosecutions in 122 cases. It has arrested some 300 people. It has seized some 300 trucks. And the NGT order said that the seized trucks, the fine should be to the tune of 50% of the cost of the trucks. So in the Amar Shakti case, in the recent Banka district case, which is Pawan Kumar versus State of Bihar case, these are two specific cases related to Bihar. NGT missed the opportunity of giving a comprehensive order based on cumulative assessment of the damage being done in rivers because of indiscriminate sand mining, and also complicity of officials. There is government has failed to prove in NGT. There is no reason to
Dr. Krishna, your voice is not clear. Hello?
Am I audible right now?
Yeah, you're audible. I think you should switch off your camera. And
okay.
Your time is also almost up. So if you could just wrap up quickly.
Yeah, so I will wrap up my presentation by saying that the law with regard to sand mining, as in the case of other environmental consequences because of developmental interventions, has been deploying artificial reason. The one aspect which I would mention in passing is that I was a co-petitioner in the National Green Tribunal in the Ganga waterway case, and while the case was on, it was filed in 2015. In 2017, the government said, earlier it was saying that the waterway related dredging will continue and it will not require environmental clearance. But in 2017, the expert committee gave an opinion that it is covered under the EIA notification, and therefore dredging cannot happen without environmental clearance. But now the draft EIA notification exempts dredging, and it employs artificial reason. So I will, towards conclusion, I would say that with a specific reference to what one is witnessing in rivers like Son and in Ganga, I live on the bank of the confluence of river Ganga, Son and Saryu. The net annual social benefit of sand mining is very limited, and it is limited to providing very low amount of revenue to the government, and a very small number of workers are employed for livelihood, who get employed for livelihood purposes. The miners can be made to mitigate the damages, but it can only happen if cumulative impact assessment can be can be the basis of giving licenses and environmental clearance. Restricting mining to only those places which are not vulnerable sites can be a beginning point, but it is not a permanent solution. So I would say that in mining and in the guidelines also, which Mr. Lal was mentioning, it is not, it is the inferences reached in the guidelines are not based on reasoned inferences. They are not reasoned inferences. They are half-reasoned inferences. And I would conclude by making last three comments in particular. One is that habitats in and around river floodplains in Bihar are being destroyed. The insects, flora, fauna is not even factored in the decision making. The quality and quantity of water in the basin, in the river basin in the area is deteriorating. And one last point which I want to say, and also I want to agree with Professor Rajiv Sinha when he said that the guidelines misses to point out that a reference state of a river is non-negotiable.
Yes.
That a particular state of river, carrying capacity of
Dr. Krishna, thank you so much.
Therefore, I'm concluding line. Therefore, I think both with regard to reference state and also paleo channels, they both have to be considered non-negotiable. Their paper compliance and artificial reason-based lawmaking and guidelines is not helping the cause of environmental justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Krishna. Very important points brought up. And if cumulative impact assessments are the basis for issues, then of course there would be a whole lot of positive changes on the ground. I'd like to hand over the question and answer session now to Debashish. Debashish, over to you. I'm sorry, I think we exceeded by a few minutes. But, I think you will too. So we're even on that one already. Thanks a ton. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Malavika. And first of all, my thanks to all the panelists for this interesting discussion, especially the presentations. I will straight away, I mean, there has been a lot of questions which have been put up in the question and answer box, and some of them are comments and some of them already have been addressed to online, but I will pick up some of the interesting questions. And first I will begin with Professor Rajiv Sinha, and see that most of the questions are directed towards him. But I will pick up an interesting question. Professor Sinha, there's a question on like what could be a possible sediment management plan for a river like Kosi? And also if you could share your views on reservoir sediment management plan. So there are two parts to the question.
Okay, I showed in one of my slides kind of a general sediment management plan or a framework. And I guess there are four very important questions to answer when you want to develop a sediment management plan. One, as I said, where are the sediments? And I mentioned that in any river, there are, the entire stretch of the river is not silted or sedimented, right? So you need to identify those hotspots of siltation. That's the first. The second, issue is that how much sediment we are talking about. And when I did this project for the Kosi River in Bihar for the Bihar government, and I gave the report to them, until then we had no idea as to what is the volume of sediment we are talking about. Is it 10 million? Is it 20 million? Is it 100 million? Is it 1,000 million tons? Basically, no idea. Because all the earlier estimates were based on the hydrological budgeting of the river, and that data is very erroneous because you have one station at Birpur and the other station is at Baltara, which is also not working for the last 10 years. And this data is at least 15 years old. And on that basis, if you estimate if you use a simple hydrological budgeting, this is going to be totally erroneous. So that's the second question. The third question is that how are you going to extract the sediments, or silt, for example, and then there are standard protocols and for doing that. And Mr. Lal talked about there are now, of course, much more recent addition to extraction policies and so on. And the most important thing is that when you talk of this kind of volume of sediment, what do you do with that? And again, we did a small project for the Bihar government, and we gave them the entire plan of silt utilization. And as I mentioned in my talk, that these sands, Kosi included, are very fine and they're very rich in mica. So they are not very useful for these, conventional construction activities. If you recall, in your house construction, you would always use that, red and pink sand from the southern rivers, which are also called Morram in the local words. We never use these mica-rich Himalayan sand for foundation or for making pillars and so on. These are standard, wisdom, which people, but then there is a scientific reason for that. And these Himalayan sands are mostly used for plastering and for other purposes and so on. But having said that, there are still large-scale usage possible. For example, the filling of the low-lying areas, the road construction and compaction, even agriculture, ceramic, and we suggested a whole plan, including the economics of that, to the Bihar government. Unfortunately, these reports normally get lost in the government system and they are not implemented upon. So there are ways of doing that, and the final point is that reservoir sedimentation versus the river sedimentation, they are two different processes. And I think we all understand that for reservoir management, there are very standard, policies. There are standard, SOPs which are already designed. They have to be emptied at regular time, depending upon the volume of the reservoir, and that determines the reservoir life, etc. So there is a cycle which have to be maintained anyway. So that process is completely different from what we are discussing today. I hope I've answered the questions.
Thanks a lot. So the next question is addressed to Mr. Nachiket. And this is to deal with the, there was a recommendation of cumulative impact assessment. And also, if you could, are there any examples of that? And what should be the key components of such an approach for management and conservation of rivers? Yeah. Please, Mr. Nachiket.
Yeah, so I really think there is a need for a cumulative assessment. And I think Professor Sinha has already highlighted some of the details of that. So in terms of not to repeat what was already said, I would say that this becomes important when we look at the district level decision making that has been proposed in the guidelines, because for a district, impacts might be happening upstream and the district might be getting affected because of upstream sand mining, or sand mining in a particular district might affect a downstream district. So I think in this context, cumulative assessments are really required. Yeah, that's just a brief response from my side. Yeah.
Thanks, Nachiket. So now I move on to Jharna. Can I speak in Bengali?
Kintu Jharnadi is not on the call. Her call dropped off.
Okay.
So that's a bit of an issue. I'll try and get the questions answered by her when we. Achha, I think she's just joined. Okay, you can probably speak in Bengali and ask her. Jharnadi,
আপনি আমাকে শুনতে পাচ্ছেন?
I can see her on the call.
Is she muted or?
I think she's just rejoined. Yeah.
It's Siddharth.
হ্যাঁ জর্নাদি
সরি আমি দেবাশিস বলছি। একটা প্রশ্ন ছিল আপনার কাছে, যে এই যে স্যান্ড মাইনিং লাইসেন্সেস গুলো ইস্যু করা হয় স্টেট গভর্নমেন্ট বা মিউনিসিপ্যালিটি বা অনেক সময় পঞ্চায়েতের তরফ থেকেও, তো আপনার যে এই ফোরাম দক্ষিণবাংলা মৎস্যজীবী ফোরাম, তারা এই ইস্যুর সাথে কিভাবে এনগেজ করছে বা ডিল করছে স্যান্ড মাইনিং লাইসেন্সেস এর ব্যাপারটা?
Jharnadi, there seems to be a network issue.
So should I move on to the next?
এটা নিয়ে আমরা বিশেষ করে থাকি কেসিআর রিভার অঞ্চলটা
ঝর্ণাদি আপনার আওয়াজ একটু কেটে যাচ্ছে। I think it just dropped, the call dropped. Debashish, should I just quickly fill in from whatever I've heard from Jharnadi?
Why not? Sure.
Yeah. So on the question of licenses, I'm not completely aware about the sand mining issue, but recently in the area that Jharnadi is from, the fisher folks who had turned from being fisher community fishers to labor for the sand mining industry. The sand mining industry ended up becoming mechanized, and then the fishing community actually went back to being laborers in other places, and then they also started doing labor work in picking gravel from the river. And then there was an attempt to also bring in mechanization into the gravel mining, but the local fishing community in which Jharnadi is also involved, they came together and they defended their right to access and mine that, not going into the merits of the effects of mining, but they did come together and actually stop the mechanized gravel mining in the area, and only the local fishing communities and others with them are manually now taking the gravel out of the river. I hope that answers somewhat.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that piece of information, Siddharth.
Yes.
So, if I could just add, a small point here, I think Mr. Lal can also confirm this. This MoEF 2020 guidelines strongly prohibits the mechanized gravel mining. Because I studied that document a while ago, and I do remember that there was a clause in that the mechanized gravel mining is actually prohibited in all areas. But he can confirm better than I do. You are muted, Mr. Lal.
Sir, you are correct, sir. Yes.
Okay, maybe moving on to Mr. Das, Darshanji, you talked about how Mahanadi Bachao Andolan has been involved in dealing with these issues related to sand mining in your region. There was a question on what is the role of local and grassroots politicians in aggravating sand mining. So we would like to know from you that how your Andolan is addressing the local and grassroots level politicians in this aspect. Yes, please.
Yeah, as far as the local community is concerned, the local communities are not involved in, what I should say, while the sand mining blocks are being leased out, the local local community or local self-government or panchayats or gram sabhas are not taken into confidence or consideration. They are not consulted. And that is the most important part in this case. In many of the rivers, suppose one mining block is there, a sand mining block is there, or a patch is there, that is obviously coming under one panchayat or one urban local body. But the urban local body or the panchayat do not have any say over leasing out the mining patch, sand mining patch. That is most important part of what I see. Number two, the local politicians has connivance with the administration and the mafia, and they really they are responsible for such illegal reckless mining, causing a lot of impact on the livelihood and overall water and air pollution as well. In many of the cases, sir, in Odisha now we see in many rivers the conflict between the local people and the mafia connived with politicians and administrators and local authorities are seen, and a lot of issues, law and order issues, has come up in this period. So we have in many rivers, we have some organizations who are fighting for the river or for protecting the environmental flow of the river. In many rivers, we have small groups, and those groups are putting up their resistance against reckless sand mining and other detrimental projects which are badly affecting the sustainability of a river. So we are not in a coordinated way, but in many cases, the sporadic resistance or opposition to this kind of sand mining is going on. But at the same time, the government of Odisha has come up with a new notification in which they have identified 4,333 sand mining blocks in 11 rivers, which they are going to give on a on a long-term basis. Once it is given for 5 years, and there is no change, no resistance can can defy or can take their decisions back. So that's another dangerous aspect we see as of now in Odisha.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Lal, there is an interesting question from Suresh Bhai, that we all know that rivers do not follow boundaries, and there is a need to go so beyond the boundaries. So how, I mean, in terms of the current guidelines, do you see that, are there any plans to address this gap in
Yes.
terms of considering river as a whole and having sediment budgets for our rivers? Yes.
Yes, I will just let you know, sir. Basically, generally, the rivers are available in the state boundary. If we see in our country, so basically, such type of project generally comes under the at the center level before the expert appraisal committee. And when such project came, then the expert appraisal committee in Delhi, in MoEFCC Delhi, they consider other district survey report also. And this is very good question. Certainly, we have to think about to club these two district survey report. Presently, what happens? All these district survey report, they are sending to their state mines and geology department. But Mr. Babu is correct. They may not thinking about such type of thing. So basically, the interstate boundary project come to the Ministry of Environment Forest. During that time, EAC sees such type of things ki when which particular area it should be no go mining area, or which should be there, and we will think about this, how to consider this situation. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. So my last question is addressed to Dr. Krishna. So there are actually two parts. One is like sand mining. Does it come under minor mineral mining? If yes, so do you see it as a violation of Panchayat Act? And also, we would like to hear about that, how sand mining aggravates labor migration. So there are two questions for you, sir.
Am I audible? Yeah.
Yes.
Sand mining contributes to migration in a structural way, because the one witnesses that because of mining, the adjoining areas start suffering from water crisis. Also, the source of irrigation in our areas have been groundwater, and groundwater level is depleting. And because of sand mining, the depletion also gets aggravated. So it does contribute to migration, but in a structural way. With regard to the role of panchayats, there is definitely a role of panchayats, and panchayats are being barred from exercising their rights with regard to sand mining by states like Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh, explicitly and implicitly by other states. So, but the exercise of the act is not happening because the panchayat leaders or the heads of the panchayats are not informed enough about their legal rights. If they are informed not only about legal rights, but also the rights of the river with regard to sand, I think that knowing of the cumulative impact will be transformational. Unless one works with the panchayats, because their experience is a lived experience, a felt experience of the environmental damage. One cannot find sustainable solutions from state capitals and national capital in future. Only engagement with panchayats, but informed engagement, because knowing is doing. Unless they know about the extent of damage to the environment because of sand mining, they will not take enlightened, they cannot make enlightened interventions, and that has been the missing point. Most panchayats see rivers in their area, or those very ghats which they are in proximity with. That kind of narrow, truncated approach towards river or river sand mining will not give them complete picture. If they get a complete picture, panchayats can play a very important role in safeguarding, or also in many cases stopping mining if it's that site is explicitly, clearly, manifestly vulnerable or extremely damaging. But the truncated approach is limiting the outlook or the worldview of the panchayats, and that has ensured that they have not been enlightened interveners. Many times they are found complicit, many times also because of ignorance, many times because of exchange of share in the profits which emerge from sand mining, both illegal and legal mining. Thank you.
Thanks, Gopalji. So, Malavika, if we have time, can we, if we have some more time, can I request the panelists to make a 1-minute summary if they want to? Yeah.
Yes, I think we can go on for a bit. So definitely, please.
Sure.
Carry on.
राजीव जी आपसे शुरुआत करते हैं. Sure. I just wanted to end up by saying that, and I again repeat that the MoEF 2020 guidelines is a wonderful document. I have read that very carefully, and I can make a presentation on this to NMCG. There are 3 very important elements of that. I mean, Mr. Lal already said that. The district survey report, the mining plan, and the replenishment study. If these 3 elements can be implemented by the concerned states, I think half of our problem will be solved. That's number 1. The second point I wanted to bring up here is the use of modern technologies, and that has multiple dimensions. I say that, for example, I mentioned about the reference state, and I didn't get time to explain that. Now, reference state of a river has to be determined not by looking at the modern day position and modern day configuration of the river. It has to be based on, rivers are all very dynamic agents. It has to be based on a historical compilation of the data in terms of its dynamics and in terms of its morphology. Unless you have done that analysis, you will be totally misinformed about the reference state. And only on that basis you can do. And then there are now very, very nice modern remote sensing satellite-based high resolution data available to do that assessment, number 1. 2, that even if the area is inaccessible, from various reasons, safety reasons, all these mafias and so on, there are very modern techniques. You can actually be sitting almost 5 kilometers away from the mining site, fly your drone and get the data. I did that very recently in Uttarakhand, and I got some wonderful data set. And these data sets are so powerful that you can get resolutions of something like 5 to 10 centimeters. And if you do these surveys repeatedly, you can actually convert this data into actually annual volume which is being extracted from each of the sites. That is the power of the technology we are talking about today. Okay, if we are not using these technologies, then we are not doing a good service to the nation. That's all I want to say here. You are muted, Mr. Sen.
Nachiket, your turn.
Yeah. So I just want to add a little bit on the spatial zoning aspects, because that keeps coming up in discussions related to sand mining, that we might have no-go areas, we might have areas where some sand mining could be allowed and so on. But in the context of rivers, there are challenges in doing so. Like, for instance, often it's believed that if there is a protected area declared on a river, like there is a dolphin sanctuary at Bhagalpur in Bihar, then all the dolphins are just there, and that's an ecological hotspot. So we shouldn't mine there, or avoid that area. However, the whole river system can be considered, especially for the east zone, as a hotspot for species like river dolphins. So in terms of where to do dredging, in terms of coming to the practicalities of decision making about where dredging could be allowed, where sand mining could be allowed, the spatial zoning approach, one has to tread very carefully, whether it's for no-go areas or whether it's for deciding upstream, downstream effects. And in that sense, I again want to, there was also a question earlier, and just re-emphasize on the importance of cumulative assessments, because typically we see that most sand mining impact assessments, there are very few, of course, in India yet, but most of them are very localized. Yeah, that's all from my side. Thank you.
Mr. Das.
Yes, in my view, data, technology, laws are important tools to save our rivers from reckless sand mining, no doubt about it. But what I see, a space for the community to raise their voice. If the river flows in their locality, the community must have a space to say that, look, my river has to be made alive, and any damages to the life of the river must not be tolerated, and we will not allow it. That kind of space perhaps is more important at this point of time than law, data and technology also. We have this law, 2006 MoEF law, which clearly speaks about the sand mining, how we will do it, how sustainable it will be, and all those narratives are there. But today we see that is not being respected. Whatever data we have today on rivers, that is not respected, and accordingly it is not been used when we allow the sand miners to mine a particular block. Likewise, technology, yes, technology is most important to see the alternative to sand requirement or need, but at the same time we need to see that how those things are really implemented, and where is the space for the local authority like panchayat, like local self-governments, where are the space, and unless the space is created, I think we cannot save our rivers from reckless sand mining or the depletion of the rivers as such. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Lal, aapki bari.
Sir, basically, this river, the sand mining is not a sand mining, it's a gold mining nowadays. It's not a minor mineral, it's a gold mining. How to protect this, how to do the sustainable sand mining, because sand is required for our country for various development projects. So basically, if one can properly implement the sustainable sand mining management guidelines 2020, and the monitoring mechanism using IT-enabled technology, artificial intelligence, if we do, there may not be problem. And the environment clearance is various ECs issued under the provision of EI notification 2006 should be implemented in toto. जैसे कि हमारे देश में नदियों को जो नदी होती है उनको देवी का दर्जा, माँ का दर्जा दिया जाता है, तो उन्हें माँ की तरह हमें सेवा करना चाहिए। नदी से सैंड निकालना जितनी की जरूरत है वो जरूरी भी है, बट उनको प्रॉपरली सस्टेनेबल, क्योंकि अगर हम आज डैमेज करेंगे तो हमारी जो नेक्स्ट जनरेशन और पूरा सब कुछ डैमेज हो जाएगा। तो यही मैं कहना चाहता हूँ कि जो भी भारत सरकार, MoEFCC, माइंस मिनिस्ट्री, स्टेट गवर्नमेंट जो रूल्स होते हैं उनको अच्छे से इम्प्लीमेंट हो, तो आई थिंक कोई बहुत बड़ा रॉकेट साइंस नहीं है। बाकी भी लोग प्रॉपरली सैंड माइनिंग पहले भी होती थी, बिना रूल के भी होती थी, तो इस चीज को अगर हम अच्छे से करें तो आई थिंक ये प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व हो सकती है। थैंक यू वेरी मच सर।
थैंक यू सर। गोपाल जी।
Given the fact that land, sand, and water coexist, and rivers are land builders, so those land building happens through sand and sediment. So how is the stoppage of a geological process scientific? Transboundary river basin approach, in especially Ganga river basin, to begin with has been truncated. The river basin master plan focused only on 79% of the Ganga river basin. Now we are being given this argument that some guidelines can ensure that interest of the river's right to sand can get recognized through guidelines. I think this is, so far, I think there is a poverty of imagination with regard to protecting rivers' right to sand. And I would end by saying that unless Ganga River Basin approach is adopted in toto, state-centric, administrative division-centric guidelines have not been have been effective. In fact, Dr. Lal acknowledged that implementation is a problem. There will never ever be a time when implementation will not be a problem, because rule making and also the 2022-2020 guidelines, which have happened without community participation in a lockdown period, they are going to be just paperwork. They are good intentions, but does not yield good results. And also the comprehensive approach is missing. It is high time that the error committed by the drafters of river basin approach in only responding to 79% of the Ganga river basin gets corrected, and rivers' right to sand is recognized. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for ending with that note. So I would now like to express my appreciation to all the panelists.
Sorry to interrupt. Jharna is also here if you want her to also make a 1 minute quick summing up.
Jharna di, আপনি কিছু বলতে চাইবেন? আপনি সবাইকে শুনলেন, আপনার নিজেরও সব এক্সপেরিয়েন্স শেয়ার করলেন, সবার জন্য একটা যদি সাজেশন রাখতে পারেন।
নদী যারা আগে লাগিয়ে হচ্ছে মায়ের মতো, তাকে সেভাবে দেখতে হবে। তোলা এখনো তোলা যায় নদীর পাড়ে যে
I think the call also dropped. The network was very wasn't so good.
Siddharth, if you could make out, then you can share.
No, I couldn't really. The network was very choppy. What I'll try to do is I'll get her comment and add it to the post-event report.
Thanks, Siddharth. Yeah. So can I continue now?
If Raviji also wants to make a final statement, I don't know. Up to you, Debashish. Yeah.
I would tend to agree to an extent with Gopal, Krishna, that we can make all the rules, regulations, guidelines, technologies, etc. But they have to be implemented, and for that, it is often said that a political will is required. When I look back 40 years ago, and I look at the 1970s and the start of that Chipko movement, building up into a nationwide consciousness about the need to preserve forests and the coming together of people from all over the country, as I said before, I think it made a big difference. Time and again, efforts have been made to open up common lands for deforestation. They have not been allowed. Similarly, the government today, state governments are hard pressed for money, and they see the sale of natural resources as a good way of earning revenue for their administrations. Unless natural resources ownership devolves on local communities, it's going to be very hard to prevent illegal sand mining. Within the India Rivers Forum, we have started talking about the need to perhaps looking at the quantum of sand that is being extracted. How can we say that this is a minor mineral? It is not a minor mineral, it's a major mineral. And that point, Dr. Lal has also reiterated. He has called it gold. So we are told that the rules for managing major minerals are more stringent. Of course, I know that look at Goa, look at Bellary, look at Kudremukh. All these places, even major minerals, have problems. So until local communities begin to have ownership of their natural resources, it's going to be very difficult to prevent illegal sand mining and over-exploitation of sand. Thank you.
Thanks, Ravi. So we all would agree that the presentations and follow-up discussions have not only enhanced our depth of understanding about the various interfaces, but also identified the knowledge and policy gaps, as well as the political will, which Ravi just mentioned, which need to be further addressed. And there is a need to have a multidimensional and participatory approach for the issue to be taken care of. Personally, the subject still intrigues me and I plan to learn more. And I would again like to thank all the panelists and the participants for making it a truly memorable evening in IRF's history. And we hope to continue the discussions. So with that note, I would like to now hand over to Malavika to summarize. Yeah. Malavika.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Debashish. I think you've also summarized. Ravi has also given some comments, Richard. So overall, the discussion, I think, was it covered a vast range of issues within the sand mining ambit, all the way from the issues regarding sediment, the specific scientific issues, the use of technology, which I think all of us agree that needs to increase across the board, maybe in monitoring and other aspects. The lack of administrative will has been highlighted specifically by two, or maybe not specifically, but underlines what a couple of other of the speakers were also talking about on the ground. The issue regarding, I think, Dr. Krishna's talk on incomplete paperwork regarding several cases not being able to, reach a good end because you don't actually have the documentation in hand. So that is also a gap which kind of is something which actually can be worked on. When we talk about what Jharna ji said on the ground and what Mr. Das also mentioned in some places, the importance, in which Ravi summarized in the end, actually, the importance of, and I think Himanshu put it in a comment, where is the community? Why is it getting left behind in this war, as we are calling it over here in many cases? And if we don't have the community and civil society, along with this whole legal, academic, engineering battle, then the implementation and successful implementation is just not going to happen. So I think all in all, there are several takeaways from this. It seems that a lot of what we've been doing for many years now continues to be on the agenda. It needs to be enhanced. The science part needs to be enhanced. The community outreach and mobilization needs to be enhanced. All of it needs a larger push. And I was just wondering, one of the things which I have not heard, and maybe my recent experience has given me, made me understand a certain leverage on that case, is that I don't know if anybody has actually had any kind of outreach to large construction companies and in a sense insist that they come on board of something like this. The bigger ones, the ones who have a huge advertising outreach, the ones who have huge buy-in into this kind of issue. Have anybody worked with them? Has anybody spoken to them? Have they been, reached with surveys and data collected from them as to how they want to buy in into conserving our rivers for long-term human gains, so to speak, and ecological sustainability? So I think, Debashish, I'd like to just wind up with that. Again, Debashish has already thanked all the panelists, and I'd also like to thank the organizing committee for this every year annual event, which we attend with great enthusiasm and which we hope is going to continue. And with that, thank you everybody for joining us. It was an extremely interesting and fruitful session. And I'll hand back to Debashish for a couple of housekeeping points. Over to you, Debashish.
Yeah, I'll just take 2 more minutes. So I take this opportunity to remind all the participants to attend the final session on the national level dialogue. We are all looking forward to it around the theme of Is Sand Mining Killing Our Rivers? It's scheduled on 28th November, that's next Saturday, again from 4 to 6:30 p.m. And apart from the presentation of national overview and panel discussions on the subject, you will be happy to know that the winners of Bhagirath Prayas Samman and Anupam Mishra Memorial Medal will be also announced at the event. The keynote address is expected to be given by Justice Madan Lokur. So please share the event announcement with your friends and groups interested in river conservation. See you all in a week's time. Thanks. Over to Siddharth.